Assalamu alaikum. This is Abdul Malik Mujahid. Welcome to Muslim Network television channel. Today we will be talking about something which we rather not talk about. It happens and it happens often. Another black man declared criminal by somebody on the street and murdered. And law is on his side until it took 2 months of protest and couple of videos which show the brutality and inhumanity of the murderer. They remain free during that time. What did they do during that time? What type of laws allow people to be treated this way? We'll be discussing all of that, but the name of the beautiful human being is Ahmad Arbery, and the murder took place in Georgia. And he was just 25-year-old. He was about to become 26 before he left this world, not by his choice, but somebody who took his life. What will happen now? Will he be given justice? Will there be reforms? Will gun laws will be reformed? What other laws need to be reformed in this area? Or it will happen the business as usual that some people will talk about it, couple of editorials, it will become one of the other case, grand jury will not find enough evidence to indict those people, and then few more protests as it happened every time an innocent life is taken. Why our country, why this happen in America all the time? To discuss these issues with us, I have Preacher Moss. Preacher Moss is a teacher, a civil rights activist, as well as comedian, and a friend of mine. Please welcome Preacher Moss. With also, we have Murtaza Khaja. Murtaza Khaja is from Georgia himself, and he went to schools in Atlanta, and he's a legal and policy director of CARE Georgia, Council of American Islamic Relations. He has represented many victims of anti-Muslim discrimination and helped defeat anti-immigration bills in the Georgia state legislature and led effort to organize the first ever Muslim Advocacy Day at Georgia state capital. Uh, Welcome, Murtaza Khaja.
Alhamdulillah, thank you. Assalamu alaikum to everyone, and thank you for having me.
Peace be with you. Assalamu alaikum. Let me ask you, preacher, why it continued to happen?
I think there's 2 points I would look at, two very salient points. Number one is the environment has been fermenting for quite a number of years. And I say for the black man in America for a long time, going back to slavery, Jim Crow, racism, institutional racism as a whole, it requires black life to somehow be validated. It's like you have to have permission to exist.
Oh my goodness, you have permission to exist, you said.
So when you have that in people's mind, you have to have permission to exist. It means that you're not going to be entitled to a real mode of justice, fairness, equality. And so that's carried over. And when it becomes that environment, you talk about citizens' arrests, you're really talking about a revisit of the old, the white citizen councils that they used to have down south. So this is a revisiting of that. And with the economy and COVID and things like that, people are desperate. And the way an oppressor feels good, if you will, is to oppress other people. And so we have these laws in place that people think, and to your opening statement, what were they doing? They were living their lives. They thought they had gotten away with it. They were comfortable. This was a norm for them. So when you start looking at it like that, this is the reason why it continues. And I have said on my own platform, the Shout Out Show, it's like, stop asking people permission to be great. And definitely stop asking people permission to exist. That's not the nature of our people as African Americans or Muslims. And I think we have to get out of that mindset because we've gotten a little lazy and people think that it's okay to do that.
Now, let me move towards Murtaza Khaja. Preacher Moss used a very strong phrase, permission to exist. It just went straight in my heart. What are the laws in the state of Georgia which sort of allow this format of modern day lynching to go on, that somebody sees somebody, decides himself that person is a criminal and takes out the gun, followed the person, takes out the gun and kills the person and remains free? What set of these modern day lynching laws allow this behavior?
Absolutely. I mean, you put it in perfectly into words. This is a modern day lynching. So the two laws that are at issue here, which are archaic laws that have no place to being on our books now and are based on common law principles of hundreds of years ago, are the stand your ground law, and this, which is a part of the self-defense laws, and also the citizens arrest law. Both of these laws are incredibly problematic separate from one another, but when used together, they, like you said, a private person may decide to take the law into their own hands and then can act upon it, as we've seen in this case, feeling that they can act without impunity. The first problem is the citizens arrest law. The citizens arrest law says a private citizen may arrest an offender if the offense is committed in their presence or where their immediate knowledge. Now, what this means is the person's immediate knowledge has to be not based on hearsay, but firsthand evidence. If the offense is a felony and the offender is escaping or attempting to escape, then the private person may arrest him upon reasonable and probable grounds of suspicion. In this case, that absolutely was not there from the beginning. This is a man, Emmett Arbery, a young man who is jogging through a neighborhood, and there's no one sees him committing a crime, but because he's running and is a black man, these two individuals, father and son pair, felt that he was a threat and felt that he may have committed a crime. Even on the 911 call, they say, we don't know what he's done. We've had break-ins, but we don't know if this is him. By the law, you can't base your actions on hearsay. So even in this case, the citizens arrest law should not apply. And then there's the stand your ground law, which says, and Georgia has some of the broadest stand your ground and self-defense laws in the country. It says that when you're confronted with deadly force, you don't have a duty to retreat. That's pretty much what it says. It's the beginning of it. What this means in this case is, and how the first district attorney, or actually he was the second district attorney who later had to recuse himself, handled it in this case, is he said that because Arbery grabbed the shotgun when he was accosted by these men, he's making the argument that because the men put a gun in his face and Arbery grabbed it, that's Arbery initiating the contact. And so any action beyond that is reasonable defense because Arbery has a gun in his hand, ignoring the fact that these two men hunted him down like prey, cornered him on the street, pulled a gun out on him. That to the initial district attorney or to the second district attorney was not sign of aggression, was not Arbery being in fear of his life, but that was a valid citizen's arrest in his point. Which brings us to the problem of the prosecutors, but I'll save that for later.
The problem of the prosecutor. Preacher Maz, how you feel about that? If somebody is about to be killed by a gun, doesn't have any type of right to push that gun away or grab it and just try to save his life? Is there a law? Is there a universal principle of self-defense here that you must try to protect your life?
Let me tell you what they said on a 911 call. When asked, what was this person doing? They said he's a black guy running down the street.
Black guy running down the street.
He's a black guy running down the street. Okay, so it's a thing of, it's like old Southern law. A white guy shoots a black guy, calls the sheriff. He said, "What were you doing?" He was trying to steal my bullets.
I mean, I remember. I mean, this using
You
that.
get arrested for stealing bullets. No, you shot me. Like he ran away. No, you shot me. But that's theft. Listen, I don't take this wrong, but I have absolutely no compassion. I have no faith, and we should say this. Just get out in the open. We can't continue to put faith in people who are irrational, hoping that we're going to get some kind of rational decision. That is the problem. The laws are there. It takes years. Mataza, you're a lawyer. It takes years to change these things off the books.
And I think you bring up the right point that we can't put faith in a system that's built upon the subjugation of people of color. This criminal justice system, people talk about it being broken. It's not broken. It's working the way that's intended to work, which is at the cost of Black and brown lives and by incarcerating them. So that's a very good point that you just brought up.
That also reminds me of the the media and the society would perpetuates the fear of the black. It dawned upon me, I was coming out of my office of Sound Vision, and I was about to enter highway. Then I saw somebody asking me, on the side there was a car, and somebody was asking me to, giving me a hand to stop. And so I stopped and lowered the window. First thing that person says, "Oh, thank you so much for not being afraid of a black man." I say, "What?" He say, "For 30 minutes, I'm trying to find somebody who can give a jump to my car, and nobody was stopping it." It hurts me more than anything in those days. Realization of what people go through.
Well, I mean,
How in South this thing is further perpetuated, that these people who think they have to decide that somebody is a criminal and they have to do something about it by themselves. You're saying something, preacher?
yeah, but America makes criminals. Let's just call it what it is. America makes criminals. The criminal justice system is slanted, whereby a person can be innocent. They can be innocent. There's something on Netflix called The Innocent Projects, and I binge watched the whole thing. And it is the system that allows people the arrogance to affect people's lives. People are doing 25, 30, 35 years in prison before somebody realizes, hey, they were actually innocent because the police acted a certain way and the prosecutor acted a certain way. And these guys didn't have O.J. Simpson lawyers. There was no Johnny Cochran. So they railroaded. Alhamdulillah for DNA. Because guys have been doing years in prison. The DNA didn't match for 27 years. They didn't look at other suspects. They didn't investigate. That's the guy. That's who we want. We're gonna make it stick on him. And I'm not saying that cops are bad, but I'm saying this is the environment in which they work in. I have a cousin who's a police officer, used to be a police officer. They ran him out of the system as a police officer because the powers that be want what they want. And when you start realizing that folks are making this situation historically, black people were free from slavery. What's the next thing that comes after Reconstruction? Vagrancy laws, which means that if you don't have a job and the police come by, they have a right to arrest you and put you in prison. And the only jobs that were allowed were the slavery jobs. And now you're going back to the slavery jobs and they're paying you probably worse than free. But that creates the prison farm system and taking that labor and I'm going to take this free labor. I'm going to make free labor and I'm going to send it around. I'm going to get paid for it under bogus laws. These are crimes against humanity. And
I like that term to be applied, crimes against humanity, because that's what these things are. And you brought up an issue of the the conversation about the Innocent Project. So we're going to take a short break at this moment, and we'll come back and get back to about the case of Mr. Arbery, who left this world. But you both are bringing points about the laws and Innocent Project and things like that. We will explore in a minute as we take a very short break.
Okay.
You're listening to Mujahid Talks at the Muslim Network Television. Welcome back. This is Malik Mujahid, and with me is Preacher Moss, a teacher and a comedian, and Murtaza Khaja, who is a lawyer with CARE Georgia. You mentioned Innocent Project and before the break, and I remember giving a speech in Winston-Salem in North Carolina, and these were the days of Abu Ghraib, and the torture images were all over the newspapers, and everybody was talking about these things. And so one person stood up in the audience in Q&A, and he said, I have been in prison for 29 years. And when I saw those photos, I thought that's the prison of North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out one of the torturer was from the prisons of North Carolina. And when I get to know him, it turned out he was one of those people who got released thanks to the Innocent Project. And they still wanted him to compromise and agree to some smaller charges. Then he spent another 9 years because he said, I didn't do anything to compromise on anything. So thank God for the Innocent Project. Thank God for the videos which came out. Otherwise, this guy will not be arrested. And thank God for the DNA. So technology is improving and helping, and human beings are coming forward to help. But when our laws are going to change, can you, Murtaza, dwell on these things? What are the moves in the Georgia to change these laws which encourages people like that? And we will definitely get back to you, get back to the discussion why the murderers remain free despite they saying that we don't know what he did, but it was a black man on the street, something like that, right? To 911 call, that's what they said, right?
Yeah.
What was the line, Preacher, on that?
Yeah, that's right. He's a black guy running down the street.
Black guy running on the street. So, Murtaza, what would you say about these laws? What are the prospects of changing these laws?
So these laws are archaic in nature already. They need to be off the books, but what we really need is long-term criminal justice reform, because they're operating within a system and within institutions that are, again, built upon the subjugation of people of color, particularly African American. Some of the challenges in cases like this are just inherent when you have a killing. It happens in police brutality cases as well, where the victim is killed. The only person, when there's not a video of the shooting, here there is a video of the shooting, but a lot of times when there's not a video of the shooting, the only person to give witness to it is the killer themselves. So you don't hear the other side of the story. You only hear the killer, the police officer, or the person acting as an arm of the police saying that we had this fear. And that's the issue with having fear being a subjective tool that's used in these laws, is people can say that they're fearful about anything. When it's subjective, a person doesn't have to act reasonably. And when it's, even if the law says reasonable nature, if it's a police officer, we know that's not implemented properly. Beyond just these two laws being off the books, we have to have a real talk about our criminal justice system and how it looks at people of color and African Americans. In Georgia, an African American is 3 times more likely to be killed by a police officer than a white person. Nationally, that's actually, or in Georgia, it's actually 2 times as likely. Nationally, it's 3 times as likely. This isn't something that's just happening in Georgia. It's prevalent throughout the country. I think Oklahoma has the largest case of police brutality against African Americans. Even from Georgia, you're 6 times more likely to be killed by a police officer if you're African American than if you live in Georgia. So all of these laws need to be looked at from a holistic standpoint. I'd love to see them off one by one. That's great as well. But until we actually address the bias that's inherent in our system and institutions, which a lot of groups are working on, The Innocence Project is part of that group. The NAACP, the ACLU, Black Lives Matter, the SPLC, a lot of criminal justice groups are working strongly against this and eradicating this implicit bias and a lot of times explicit bias that's inherent in the system.
Preacher, I hope you don't mind me asking. Do you personally encounter things like that? I mean, you travel a lot.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. In my youth, yeah. The in college, just being in college with different races and things like that. When something would happen in the dorm, we'd be asked to leave the dorm. I'm like, but I live here. I'm staying here. And the fact of the matter, people tend to work or believe they have impunity until they get checked. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
And a lot of times that checked does not happen as a part of a legal process. So you have to have a SELC, you have to have a NOI, you have to have people who are independent of a system and are, I want to say, consistently critiquing that system. We're talking about this thing, but I remember when the Rodney King beating happened. Nobody believed that police did that. You know who believed it? Black people. And it wasn't until we saw a videotape of him getting assaulted. I mean assaulted. It was brutal. Nobody believed it. We've been telling folks that the whole time. You talked about Abu Ghraib. I didn't even have to believe the photos because I know a system of oppression, and what happens is it's replicable around the country. This is what people do when they think they can get away with it. And you're talking about a mindset that's been, let's call it what it is. It's from the top. It's from leadership. If the leader thinks it's okay, then I can do it. And what you have is the blind leading the blind, and there's no space. There's no space. I've said this before. When you get somebody that believes that they're the person who decides you should have justice, or they're the person who decides you should have uh, mercy or some compassion, then there's something wrong with that. When you have a system, there's a great song by the old black poets that say the white man has a God complex. Well, that is talking about the legal system, not white people walking around. I'm talking about the legal system, and that's how they control so much of what we do. And I'm a big proponent of being able to say, hey, listen, and I tell kids this, I tell guys in prison this. I say, listen, brothers, while you're in here, whatever you're doing, I'm not worried about that. You need to know that when you come out of prison, you are going to be an entrepreneur, meaning that no one's going to want to hire you. Why? Because of the laws. No one's going to be around you. Why? Because of the stigmatism of being in prison. I said, these are the real issues that you're looking at. And it's not this mamby-pamby, pie in the sky stuff. As a black man, I'm going to tell you something. When black people have a tradition in the United States of winning, let's call it what it is. Against all the laws, you have a tradition of winning. Not a lot of cultures win. I'm talking about against the worst situations. When a person cannot beat you cheating, you know what they do? They create new laws. And what you have is a whole system of people in power. I won't say any color, but people in power consistently coming up with new laws. I mean, that's the power of it. That's Natasha could probably speak to this, critical race theory about laws being on the books that are disadvantageous to people. They just create new laws. So when you're talking about stand your ground and all that stuff, and they just created new laws. In Florida, they're making it harder to even fight against stand your ground because now the burden of proof is on the police to show that you weren't as threatened as you were, not the person that actually did the crime.
I remember, 40 years ago at the University of Chicago, in my first month and the first American protest I had there was a friend, and he was a PhD student. And in the library where I used to sit, a white lady pointed out towards him that he is the guy who stole my television. And the guy simply got arrested on that. And now we have to protest and march, go to the court. And this guy is so anti-technology that he will not even care for telephone. I mean, I'm talking 40 years ago. He didn't have a telephone. You meet. I mean, he used to be a Greek priest, and at that time he has become Muslim, and a very, a godly person. Everybody loved him. Everybody cared for him, and it took us a lot of effort to get him out that he stole my TV. The guy doesn't care for any technology. And so that was the opening for me to the idea of I saw a black man walking or jogging on the street.
But look at the process, though. Once you're arrested, you're booked, you're in the system until you're either exonerated or or convicted. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The process is not you just go in.
And part of that is that there's
and all of that. It's really meant to discourage people from seeking justice.
Murtaza, you were saying
both
something.
have mentioned, there's escalation at multiple stages. In cases we've seen, we just unfortunately 2 days ago had another case where a Muslim brother was killed by police who alleged that he was throwing rocks at them. And they were out to investigate. This has happened in Georgia, a 47-year-old man, because apparently someone called 911 because someone was jaywalking. First of all, people don't call 911 when someone's jaywalking, unless maybe it's a black man, then they'll call it. So there's escalation on the 911 call. Then there's escalation in the action. The police seeing someone throwing rocks at them, they're not threatened for their lives. A reasonable person is not going to be in fear of their losing their life there, but they choose to take lethal force. This has happened in the Anthony Hill case, another case that happened in Georgia, where this was a man in the midst of his mental health crisis, and within 6 seconds of the police officers arriving, they shot and killed an unarmed, naked black man. We had a case like this with a sister 2 years ago, and this is still under investigation, also in the midst of a mental health crisis. Her family called 911 seeking medical assistance. So the officers who have been called know that she's in the midst of a mental health crisis. Within 2 minutes of them arriving, 6 officers surrounded her, shot her 6 times to death. So there's these escalations on multiple facets and on multiple parts. And it's not just in the laws, it's in our society, and it's in our law enforcement officers as well. Got great respect for the work that law enforcement officers and individuals may do on an individual basis to keep us safe and to protect us. But as an institution, it has grossly failed this country and grossly failed people of color.
So tell us a little more about that 47-year-old person who recently got shot, a Muslim, would you mention?
Yeah, so this was a 47-year-old, Yassine Muhammad is his name. He's 47 years old. He had just finished his first shift at Zaxby's. This is in Evans County, which is close to Augusta, for our viewers who are watching this, where the Masters is. So he was, apparently police responded to a call at 12:50 about a man jaywalking or walking in the middle of the street. The man runs away once Muhammad Yassine runs away when the police are called and get there. They follow him, and an altercation pursues where he throws rocks at them. They don't talk about the size of the rocks. They could be pebbles, they could be large rocks, they could be small rocks, but he's throwing rocks at a deputy police officer. This deputy police officer responds by killing and shooting him. The GBI is investigating this case right now. The family has reached out to us to represent them and their interest in this matter so far. And so we're going to, inshallah, work with the GBI in making sure that we can have as thorough, swift, and complete as an investigation as we can. But as we've seen in the past, there's so many barriers and hurdles that this investigation is going to face.
Well, you're listening to Mujahid Talks, and with me is Preacher Moss and Murtaza Khaja, and we'll be right back after these messages. Assalamu alaikum. This is Abdul Malik Mujahid. I can say salam to you, but they cannot. You and I can fast, but they cannot. These are the Uyghur people. 3 million of them are taken to the Chinese concentration camps. The Chinese government is forcing Uyghur families to house communist observers as guests, and they are taking their children to orphanage and brainwashing them to renounce their own faith. They are not free. We are. We have a duty to stand up for the freedom of Uyghur people. This is the largest concentration camps since Nazi Germany. We must stop it. Please donate today for Save Uyghur campaign. SaveUyghur.org. Salam and Ramadan Mubarak. Welcome back. This is Malik Mujahid, and we're talking with Preacher Moss and Murtaza Khaja. And we are talking about the sad state of affair of how system is geared against poor people of all color, but especially people of color. And so society, system, and then the whatever those laws are, even those are not applicable in this case. Why in this particular case, Murtaza, police did not arrest the two shooters who murdered the person in broad daylight?
This is where our doubt in our criminal justice system and our institutions comes from, because we have this on video shooting of an unarmed black young man, 25-year-old man who had not committed a crime. 10 weeks later is when we see the first arrest, and only after the video has gone public. The police and law enforcement had this video for weeks and chose not to make an arrest. They only made this arrest after public outrage. And let me be clear about this, that public outrage, while I'm glad that it led to the arrest in this case, is more indicative of the failings of our criminal justice system and the fact that they did not act. Because the public should not be the arm that spurs law enforcement to act. Law enforcement should act without the public outcry. The police engaged in what can only be described as a cover-up in this instance. There were the fourth district attorney has been assigned on this case within 10 weeks. The first two had to recuse themselves because of personal connections with the shooter, Gregory McMichael, who worked as an officer and investigator with the Brunswick Police Department. Unfortunately, the second one, District Attorney Barnhill, when he recused himself, he also put out a 4-page memo about why he had not made arrests till this point. Anyone who understands ethics knows, and the legal system knows, that you don't recuse yourself and also put an opinion on the case. You're tainting the office for the person who takes this place next, and you're also tainting the minds of your superiors who you're sending this memo out to. Beyond that, beyond the district attorneys, the prosecutors, or the people who were assigned to this case, also had to recuse themselves because of personal connections with Gregory McMichael. So the police is engaged in a very active cover-up. The GBI, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, has been asked to investigate this cover-up. The Department of Justice has been called to look into whether this is a hate crime as well. That's in terms of the crime itself. But there's been a very active effort to avoid arresting the two men responsible and to avoid actually any type of justice for Arbery's death and for Arbery's family.
So, Preacher, do you have a lot of trust in the Justice Department under the Trump administration to come out very clean and do a fair investigation of Mr. Arbery's murder on these streets?
Let me dig into my inner Dick Gregory, if you will, my mentor, Mr. Gregory.
Yeah, I was doing a rally.
There you go.
I was doing a rally in Washington.
Here you go. Have you heard anything from the White House? Wait, hold on a minute. Wait, is it there? Of course it isn't there. They haven't commented on this thing because it suits the people that can keep them in power in some regards. And in an odd way, maybe Murtaza can talk about this. I've been working on this as actually a comedy bit. That things like this, when you see them over and over and over, it has an effect. It disenfranchises you about the justice system. It makes you feel like I don't want to be a part of it. I don't want to challenge it at all. It makes you feel like, well, what am I voting for? I'll break this down and I'll move on. If your campaign strategy is to make sure a group of people don't get to the polls, not to challenge you on issues, we don't want them on the polls because we don't want to acknowledge that their concerns, their value, things of that. We don't want them coming at all. And you win that way, you're supposed to win by consensus. They don't want consensus. And so when you see these guys, I was about to say a really bad word, but I'm gonna hold on to it because it's Ramadan. And I don't want to do an extra day. But they're suspect. And that's a nice word to say it. They're suspect. They know they can't win. And so when you talk about these guys down in Georgia, they knew they can win, but they knew we're going to lean on this law. We know the law's not fair, but that's all we have to hang on to. And so when you have that as a system, people hanging on the laws that they know aren't fair, they aren't correct, they're archaic to what Brother Mujahid said, then it tells you it's a weakened mindset. It's a weakened mindset.
So and to what Preacher Moss is saying, this isn't speculation. We have both, and this is unfortunately, CARE's a 501c3, we're nonpartisan, but I'm just speaking facts here. Georgia Republicans talking about how they're trying to keep turnout low for people coming to the polls. This is part of the Republican strategy nationwide on voter suppression. And it's happening specifically in the South. Up until very recently, there was a court case about a decade ago that allowed for southern states that were previously slave states to enact voting laws and voting regulations without the Department of Justice's approval. That was not the case before, ever since the 1960s and the Civil Rights Movement. Any type of voting law that had been put into place had to be reviewed by the Department of Justice to make sure that Black people would not be disenfranchised by it. Since then, we've seen southern states take up a spur of issues on either making it harder or impossible for felons to vote, or they're addressing what they imagine to be voter fraud, which is not an issue in the type of at the magnitude that they're suggesting. And this, when they address voter fraud, it disenfranchises disproportionately people of color, African Americans, and Asian American communities, specifically in Georgia. You've seen that it's happened in Alabama and other states as well. And so, Preacher Moss, you bring up a really good point, is they disenfranchise you. This is a form of state violence. State violence isn't just police brutality. State violence is also closing down polling stations. State violence is also making you feel disenfranchised. Because when you see things like this happen, I can speak of personal anecdote. We had on our first Muslim Advocacy Day, we had the Iman Atlanta come, Inner City Muslim Action Network of Atlanta, come join us. They're incredibly passionate about being involved at the legislative process. But because of Georgia laws, they're not able to enter without a photo ID. So ID laws are very, as we know, prevent a lot of felons, ex-felons from getting IDs. So one of them didn't have an ID. They did search for him in the system and they found an outstanding warrant. This warrant was from when he was already incarcerated. So this was a failing of the police station to take him to the court system. So it was during the time he was incarcerated. It was set that in the system. But because there was this outstanding warrant, on the day of Muslim Advocacy Day, when he was there to advocate and for easier IDs, he was arrested in front of all of the other people in Amman. Amman, Atlanta, while they were with us in our hearts and we had their support, they said, we don't want to go inside. We don't want to talk to our representatives anymore. And we huddled, we talked, we prayed about it, but they didn't want to go in. And I don't blame them. And that's because these systems and these laws and these attitudes are meant to disenfranchise people, not just on paper, which they're doing, but also in their hearts.
So if the election happen and things change and Democrats are in power, do you expect the laws to be changed? I mean, when you're talking about system is above a political change. So do you expect things to improve?
Right. I don't think it's not a party by party thing. I think there's strategic reasons for why Democrats might want more voter turnout as opposed to Republicans. So there might be benefits in terms of turnout. But because this is so ingrained in our society, we've had some of the most oppressive criminal justice legislation come out during Democratic presidents. The Clinton presidency and their efforts on anti-gang bills and in the criminal justice realm has hurt African Americans and has hurt people of color as much as any other Republican policy. So this isn't one party or the other. They all have their own ills and problems, and it's up to us as the people to speak out and be advocates for our communities within these parties. But right now, institutionally, I don't see much of a difference there.
So, preacher, you have more hope in Biden. I heard the blacks are the one who brought Biden to the to become the candidate. So, what do you think? He's going to change something?
Look, I'm a hopeful guy. You know, I'm a hopeful guy. But I'm a realist, man. I'm 53 years old. I watched Barack Obama become president. There's videotapes searching me around making jokes about there'll never be a black president. It should have been, there'll never be a black president that's accepted by other politicians. That should have been a joke. Because when you get into a system, you're dealing with a certain type of inertia it's been there for years. You know, everybody in politics, at some point in time, you got to bow down to your master. I'm old enough to realize it's not your constituents. It's lobbyists and folks that have things on you. You want to get everything is compromised. And when you get to a certain level of political prestige or effectiveness or efficacy, if you will, it's less and less about the will of the people. There's probably more energy to keep laws in place than to change laws, because it takes way more energy to change laws than just modify a law, just leave it where it is. And when you talk about really that whole idea of disenfranchisement, I didn't know Imam was. I know Imam from Imam Atlanta. It has to be devastating. I'll give you a better one. Watch.
If I was there, preacher, I would not have gone inside without that brother.
Look, I'm going to be honest, man. Here's something more detrimental. A black father that's taken to jail in front of his family. That's a psychological thing. You're going, what did daddy do? If daddy didn't do anything, then how can you trust the system as a young child? I used to be a school teacher. You talk about disenfranchisement. I taught in Milwaukee Public Schools. I'm going to tell you something. They recently had an election in Milwaukee, and they made people go to the polls in the middle of a pandemic. And the people had to go in the polls in the pandemic. They were black people and disproportionately affected by COVID-19. They made them go to the polls. You have to make a decision on, do I want to be healthy or do I want to exercise my right to vote? This is ridiculous.
And there was also a big thing on closing polls, the number of polls that were closed in cities like Madison versus Milwaukee, and where they were closed were areas, again, of where African Americans lived, not where white Americans lived.
That's all I'm saying. You know, Mataz is giving you facts. I'm giving you facts. I wish it was fiction. I wish somebody go, Preacher Mars is lying. I would feel better about that. But these are the facts. And I see it. My privilege as being a comedian is I travel all over the country. But people think, oh, you travel to the big cities? No, man. I travel to some of the backwoods of America, and I see how people are living. When I see white poor people being treated badly, I'm like, I got to get out of here, because it's just a matter of time.
So
that's the way I feel.
So let's talk about what is the hope for justice in this particular case? Laws exist, system exists. Do you think there is a risk that the grand jury will side, okay, well, laws allowed and we're not going to indict him? Indict those two parents, father and son?
So part of the issues with grand juries is there's a variety of issues. Two of the major ones are, one, they're held in secret. They're sealed, their documents are sealed, so you don't know what's presented to them. There's two contrary issues with that. One is they say you can indict a ham sandwich because the prosecutor only has to show bad evidence. He doesn't have to show exculpating evidence to a grand jury. He only has to show his side of the story. The other side of that is when it's a case of police brutality or when there is an alleged cover-up, they may not show evidence. They may not show a good case or a strong case. They may not show all the things they have, and people will get off. So both of these things are problematic. People should not be able to get indicted as easily by a grand jury, and they should not be in secret. So there's always the risk of, in a grand jury and in any type of jury, that you're going to get a disfavorable verdict. And if we go by past precedents, which is what you do in the law, it may even be likely that that's what's going to happen. And even if we get an indictment, if it goes to trial, like we saw in the Anthony Hill case, the felony murder charge, that he was guilty on aggravated assault, but felony murder, he was not guilty. He was the jury reached a not guilty verdict. That's not justice. That's not a win. And the unfortunate part of when that happens is because these cases are so intertwined, they seem so familiar, whether it's Trayvon Martin, whether it's Michael Brown, whether it's Anthony Hill, whether it's our brother Ahmaud Arbery, all of these cases are so familiar with us that when we see injustice in one of these cases, it's like it's injustice for all of them. The hope in that, though, is when we do finally achieve justice, when community can come together, when law enforcement can actually serve the needs of those community and get a conviction, and the people who are responsible for that person's murder are held accountable, then that will be like justice for all these families and for all those loved ones who've been hurt by their killings. Nothing can replace the lives that have been lost, but we can do best for what's best for their families. So inshallah, if we do get a conviction here, it will be like us getting a conviction. It will be like us ensuring justice in all these other cases.
What are the possibilities of some laws which allow citizens oversight on the police actions? Is there some system like that, which in Atlanta City, considering Atlanta City is a little different than the rest of the state, is there a possibility of some laws which have a higher level of insight into the justice system, oversight, I mean?
It really depends on who's responsible for the oversight. Right now in Georgia, if there's a killing by a police officer, if there's a homicide at all that the police officer is responsible for, even when it's allegedly justified, there's an investigation immediately by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. That's supposed to be independent. That's supposed to be, one that's not compromised. But unfortunately, that's not what we've seen in our cases. That's not what we've seen in our allies' cases. The GBI hasn't done the job in oversight that we would have liked. So it really depends on who is doing that oversight. We need to have a body that is actually independent from the police and from the criminal justice system to do this oversight. Because when they are a part of that arm of criminal justice, then they're inherently involved and entwined with the very people that they're meant to investigate and eventually bring charges against.
So, preacher, give me some hope, brother. It's Ramadan and Eid is coming up. Are there some resolutions Muslims must have for the future of our country to liberate it from fear, hate, and anger?
Yeah. Two things. Don't be afraid to be great, number one, and don't ask permission to be great. That's actually prophetic tradition.
Don't ask permission to be great.
Don't ask permission to be great, and don't be afraid to be great.
All right. Okay, so in Chicago also, you know, we have our cases here and we have marched with the Black Lives Matter. The good thing was that in one of the marches, half of the participants were from the Muslim community, and it was a great sight of seeing people coming out in large numbers. In Atlanta and Georgia, have Muslims come out for these marches and stand up in support of the victims?
Atlanta's got an exceptional Muslim population, and Georgia in general is this great dichotomy where we have Atlanta, which is a progressive city with a history rich in the civil rights movement, along with a very, checkered past with the Confederacy, also sort of clashing with that. we've had lots of our Muslim brothers and sisters come out on and join us in these fights. But what does need to be said, though, is Muslims, particularly immigrant Muslims, also need to check their privilege and also need to check their own implicit bias, because implicit bias and racism exists through or across the spectrum. And until we're able to address that within ourselves, which is partly the type of training we need our police officers to have, is not this explicit bias, but this implicit bias, where because of the situations, institutions, and circumstances that you've been around, you have this opinion about, people of another color, people of color in general, white people, whoever it be. There is an implicit bias. So until immigrant communities are able to do that as well, then we're not being as strong of advocates and allies as we could be.
Well, I think the Muslim community in North America has substantial number of leadership and people from African American heritage
Alhamdulillah.
who could tell you not to take permission to be great also. And so I think a better integration in that sense can help the community move forward as well. But you did remind me about what happens in Muslim community. I have for 40 years lived either 50% African American population ratio, or for last 30 years essentially in 90% Black population. And when people come, some immigrants, to meet with me, they say this: "Oh, are you safe here? Are you considering of moving?" I mean, those implicit biases, unfortunately, are part of that. But I hope that you, being Murtaza, a great lawyer with a major Muslim organization, will take active interest that every year in Georgia, laws are introduced which are designed to make Georgia a better state, which can challenge these laws, which require better training of officers, and which has a campaign to educate masses as well. So we have just 2 minutes left. I will give you, Murtaza, 1 minute. And I want preacher to go on preaching with a great message at the conclusion. Murtaza, go ahead, please.
I'm not going to take the whole minute because I want to hear as much of Preacher Moss as I can. But thank you so much. Alhamdulillah, I'm pleased to have been here and given the opportunity to speak with the community and also speak with you, Imam and Preacher Moss. This issue is not one that's just come up today. This isn't one that's going to disappear tomorrow. We need to be vigilant and we need to constantly advocate for ourselves, our communities, and those allies with us. We're only as strong as the most marginalized and the most oppressed in our community. And until we raise those voices up and raise those people up, we will continue to be marginalized and oppressed ourselves. So inshallah, we're able to do that. And thank you for having me. Assalamu alaikum.
Excellent. Thank you, Murtaza. Murtaza is legal director for CARE Georgia. We have great hope that Muslim community, along with its network and allies and all people, will take Georgia forward. Now, preacher, preach on, brother.
Well, I'm going to say something my mentor tells me every time we deal with this situation, despite what I've said here. He said, you got two choices. You can get better or you can get bitter. In that scope, I hope that we get better, but understand why there's a reason why we are bitter as well. That's number one. I think the other part of it is let me tell you, the joy of being a Muslim or converting to Islam, not just for myself, for a lot of Muslims, it gave us a new scope of law, religious law, God law, that took us away from the laws that were just killing us. It kept us in the beauty of the NOI back in the day is they didn't ask for permission. Martin Luther King didn't ask for permission, Medgar, Malcolm, and I think we all have that point. Someone said something to me, and then for our community, this is how we need to be thinking. I don't know if Ahmaud Arbery was Muslim, but if he was, and he ran for help, and a Pakistani brother opened the door, would he let him in? Would he stand for him? I've stood for brothers all over the place, and it just needs to be that type of, we need a unified front, if you will, to be able to deal with these things, and understand that we have to develop our own, as Mr. Gregory yelled in my ear, we're our own Muslim political action committees and Black folk committees. He said, you can go see Jay-Z and Beyonce, but y'all can't put people in office. He said, and then we have to think outside, forget the box. You just have to think at a totally different level above what we're construing as laws that constrict us. And again, like I said, stop asking for permission. And remember,
Thank you so much.
keep it simple.
Thank you so much, my brother preacher, my friend. And thank you, Murtaza. Thank you so much for your fights. And you have been listening to Muslim Network Television. This is on Galaxy 19, as well as Amazon Fire TV and Roku and many other places. I hope you will continue to come forward. And this is Malik Mujahid with Mujahid Talks. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you.
All right.
It's much water, whatsoever.